Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage, in the overcast and gloomy state of Maine. Once again, the weather app says it's not raining out, so I have the 55 Chevy sitting outside, and despite the fact it's wet on top, or at least it was, my phone says it's not raining, so I'm not going to worry about it. I'll probably put it inside for tonight because it's supposed to get high winds and lots of rain, so. It's been outside for 2 or 3 days. The weather's been beautiful. My son and I have been cruising it everywhere. And I guess, before we talk about my problem, two problems. One, I'm still shooting with the same shop shirt. I'm fully dressed underneath. This is just for my protection around the shop. And it's not quite at the level of giving up on it yet. So let's talk about the 55. I had to do a few mods. I try to fix something on it every day. The first day, I wanted to be able to open the hood and close the hood without losing my hand, because you had to reach up under the curve of the hood, squeeze the secondary latch, push on the hood until you're, I'll get to this, until you're uncomfortable to the point you think your hand's going to fall off, slip your hand out of the way and slam the hood down. So, with a little bit of shimming there, I needed to move the driver's side of the hood out toward the grill. And there's not much adjustment in the hood, or it wouldn't go any further forward. So looking at the hinge, I loosened up the 2 bolts that go into the cowl, put an alignment shim on the top, about a 1/16, and that straightened everything out. The hood is no longer rubbing the paint off the cowl. And I ordered some touch-up paint that I'll be doing a little touch-up. If you have a black car, you might as well have some black touch-up paint. So I accomplished that. That was the first thing I fixed, the first day, because my hand wasn't going to take it. Again, no disrespect to the guy that built it. I even had a conversation with him yesterday. He just, once he got on the road, he was just driving it. So he hadn't got around to fixing all the stuff yet. And he asked me about the alignment. I'll jump to that. First time I drove it out on the road, while it goes straight and the wheel is straight, my first thought, because if you remember my first video was about alignment, don't go back and watch it. It's probably the worst video ever shot on YouTube. But it does have some valid points. He did it himself, but he didn't set caster or even guess at it. So he stood the tire straight up and down and set the toe in and didn't do anything with the caster. I've learned from putting on a lot of aftermarket A-arms, or even if I'm working with the stock A-arms, if we have an A-arm front suspension, that I want to cock the control arm, if I'm standing on the side of the vehicle and that's the front. I want to tilt the upper ball joint back as far as I possibly can within the mechanical limits, and I'm probably only going to get 4 or 5 degrees, which is half of what you'd have if you're building a drag car. But a street car, 4 to 5 will make you go straight down the road and still allow you to steer. This car, the 55, has power steering, so that helps. If you have manual steering and a fairly small steering wheel, that might be a concern, but if it had a traditional 55 wheel on it, it's about the size of a school bus, so you could probably Armstrong steer pretty well, even with 5 degrees of caster. So it is going to get an alignment. I haven't done it yet, but I'm tired of steering it and being afraid you get into it. It's really spooky in the corner and it's just dotty. If you're going 70 miles an hour, you better pay attention. Sidebar, it's funny because this summer we bought 2 boats in June, the big houseboat, and we bought a deck boat, which I've dragged back on the trailer that I purchased. And you're steering that boat all the time. It's terrible. It's about 20 turns lock to lock. It's a wonder I haven't hit anything with it. I've actually done a pretty good job piloting it, but you just wore out. You go on a couple-hour trip, and you come back to the dock, you just want to lay down. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring it home, it has, I believe it's C-Star brand steering. It's all hydraulic. There's no steering cable. Basically, the steering wheel is a pump, hydraulic pump, and there's 2 lines that make a cylinder go left and right. When I pulled it out of the water the other day, I pulled up on the land like this, and I watched the motor just flop to one side. You can move it 6 or 8 inches without the steering wheel moving. And you can see the steering cylinder is leaking. So that will get fixed, and I can't wait till next summer when I turn the steering wheel and the first turn and a half actually does something. So that'll be fun. So when I started driving the 55, I'm like, man, this is wearing me out like the boat. I got to fix that. So that is the third thing I fixed. The second thing I did fix is the throttle linkage. If you look at a Holley carburetor, and I'll show you one because I'm right now too lazy to get up and hold one up in the video. If you're familiar with them, there's the big hole, the half-inch hole, and there's a bunch of small holes, but you get the most leverage out of the half-inch hole, and they sell a bushing for that. And in this case, the 55 Chevy has a mechanical rod from the throttle pedal, which I mentioned hinges at the bottom, and it only had about an inch of throw. I believe it was still getting full throttle with the way it performed, but it was very hard to be smooth. I wanted more travel and maybe a little more response from the pedals, so the rod that comes up out of the firewall also has a half-inch hole, and it just had a 1/4-inch nut and bolt, and the nut was inside the hole, so there was a lot of slop there. So I machined up a couple of nylon bushings, just experimenting with it. I'll probably eventually make aluminum ones, like the ones they sell. Moroso and everybody sells them for the Holley end. And in this case, both ends are half-inch, so the same bushing will work in both positions. But the nylon I machined up will probably last 3 lifetimes. So, and wow, what a difference. I can actually drive it fairly smooth. And to test it yesterday, my son and I went down to see my mother in the city, and which means it's stop signs every 50 feet. When we left her house, the school was getting out. There's a school on every other block with a crossing guard. I mean, we were in traffic solid 45 minutes getting out of town. And, you know, I have to eat crow. I have never, ever been a fan of hydraulic clutches. I have poo-pooed them on this channel, 50 times. This car has a hydraulic clutch. The first thing I thought I would do was convert it to mechanical. It works really well. It has good feel. You really can't tell it from mechanical linkage other than it's probably easier to push, which isn't a bad thing. The take-up is right off. It's perfect. It goes into gear nice. I must have stroked it 1,000 times yesterday afternoon. And so far, knock on wood, it's flawless. I'm going to see the guy who built the car tomorrow. I'm going to ask him what brand it was. So maybe in the future, my mind has been opened, and I'm no longer against the hydraulic clutch. Everything before this, the TKO 500 that I have in the Model A, I took it out of a car. I only drove it around the block. That had a McLeod hydraulic setup, and I sold it cheap. I probably should have kept it because that was probably a good one too. But again, I was anti-hydraulic clutch. So live and learn. I'm only human. We all like and dislike things. And I guess part of being, an adult is maybe revisiting some of that and maybe changing your thought process. So back to the 55, I pretty much try to fix one thing a day during this month of October, where we get to, I'm kind of glad I went ahead and got it on the road, because this month is telling me a lot of things that I can fix over the winter, and I don't have to spend all next summer working on it. I should hopefully, in the spring, be ready to go. Now, don't be alarmed. We're going to do lots of work on the 55. I'm going to probably take the rear end out. Here we go again. In the first video about the 55 last week, I said those 411 gears have to go. I've gotten used to them. The only thing that's saving it is the .61, I believe, overdrive in the TKO 600. That makes 411s drivable. I mean, 2,000 is like 70 miles an hour-ish, so that's not bad. The speedometer seems to be accurate. Yesterday I went through a speed zone, says your speed is 37, and that's what the dash said, with the gauge, with the needle going like that, but hey, close enough. So I probably will leave the gears in it, at least for next summer, just to get used to it. I considered a 370 to 390, but man, if I get the traction straightened out, so I'm going to take the rear end out of it and re-weld and revisit the pinion angle and maybe put some different spring perches on it, and well, we'll get to that. So don't be alarmed if you see the rear end cut out of it. I need to put some type of traction device on it because the wheel hops awful. It's impossible to do a burnout with it or even step on it. if you step on it in low gear, it'll just stop burning the tires and hop in the rear tires. So you got to be rolling along before you stab it. And there is some sheet metal where it was mini tubbed. I believe there's one big flat piece. There's no bead rolling on it. So under certain washboardy bumps, you get a lot of, sounds like a cake pan, you know, that awful noise. So that needs to be addressed. I don't believe there's a whole lot of, you know, sound deadening or anything. So that'll be all fun stuff we'll hit over the winter. So enough about the 55. This mess on the floor behind me. I did some trading the other day and this morning. So the two LS engines, the one closest to us is a 99,000 mile 6-liter that I have regretted selling since I did. And that came back in trade on the 72 Nova, and the other one's a 5.3, which I forget the mileage, but on those it doesn't really seem to matter. So those need to be dealt with and put away, and they were just kind of sitting there for a few days. And this morning I built a transmission for a guy, and he asked me if I'd take some stuff in trade. I didn't know he was going to bring this much stuff, but I'm pretty happy. It's, you know, it's not money today, but it could be money in trade stuff in the future. It has value. It looks like a bunch of junk, but if you add it up individually, I think I did all right. So I've never been a fan of the TH350 only because in the early 80s, when the 700R4 wouldn't work even for GM, working at a tranny dealer, tranny shop, we pulled the 700R4s out and we put 9-inch tailstock 350s to replace them. You had to move the mount, but the 9-inch TH350, the output shafts in those come 6, 9, and 12. The 9-inch lines up perfectly with a 700R4. Again, you just had to put a little plate on the mount to grab that, and the drive shafts would all fit, and that's what we did. So all the TH350s that you find everywhere had 2 lifespans. They were worn out one time, rebuilt, and worn out a second time. So most all the TH350s you encounter, you got to have at least 2 transmissions to build one that was decent because they just wore out. So every tranny sitting here has been in storage for over 30 years, and I believe it because they're all dusty, but underneath is shiny metal, so they haven't been outside. And most all of them they all had the big metal modulator. I'm talking about the TH350s. So they've never been touched. They were unbolted, the kickdown cable, everything is still there. Well, I'm a liar. That one's got the small modulator on it. But the other ones do. So I have 3 6-inch tailhousing TH350s and 1 9-inch TH350. So the people that have been asking for Turbo 350 content, it's coming your way because, you know, I can rebuild them and trade them off or sell them or something. So, but for now, they can't live here, so they'll be out in the car trailer that's probably going to sink into the ground. Excuse me. I've been talking too much and my throat's getting dry. The 2 Power Glides are probably 66 and up. Well, one has a plastic vent, the other one I can't tell. Hang on a second. See, I've over-talked. I'm just going to cough my way through it. If you remember, I built this handy-dandy no-go tool because the 1.76 gear ratio is the V8 Power Glide. And even though it takes a TH350 yoke, the output shaft is larger, believe it or not. So the 182 gear set is physically smaller. So I built this no-go gauge, and if this slips over the output shaft, it's a 1.82 ratio. The 6-cylinder version, it's a tin shell with the planetaries in it. It's pretty much junk. So unfortunately, both these Power Glides are 1.82s. Chances are, if I'm building a Power Glide these days, I'm buying a straight cut gear set, you know, for $1,000 anyway. When people come to me and want a Power Glide, I explain to them that a Turbo 400 is probably cheaper and better, but I'll still build your Power Glide if you want, but you're going to put a lot of money into it because you're starting off with a $1,000 gear set, and you need an input shaft and a hub and extra clutches and a valve body, minimum. So that's enough on that. So these 2 Power Glides are 182s. This purple short shaft Turbo 400. Originally, while I'm reading the tag, it's a 70 CA, which would be big car, Impala Caprice, with a 400 small block. It's purple, and I don't know what it came out of. The guy that dropped him off this morning told me who owned it. I know the guy, and someday I'll ask him if he remembers this transmission. So it's funny, it's the third purple Turbo 400 I've seen this year, and I built one of them. Back on the floor is a early Borg Warner T10, not the Super T10. And according to this guy ran the numbers, he thinks it's out of like a 409 Impala. If that's the case, the thing's worth about $500,000. Probably not, but who knows? So I'll check the numbers on it. It's clean, cast iron case, aluminum tail housing. So I couldn't resist that. I'm not a big fan of the early T10, but they have a following and are somewhat desirable. You probably can't see it, but sitting on top of the 5.3 is a completely intact Hurst Ramrod inline shifter. I had one when I was in high school. I briefly had it in my Chevy. It actually fits, the 4-speed hole better than the Mr. Gasket version that I prefer, and later the Hurst V-Gate. We've covered all that if you want to go back and look at my shifter videos, but Hurst acquired Mr. Gasket, and they changed the Mr. Gasket shifter to the Hurst V-Gate 2, and they also sold the Ramrods. The Hurst actually had 2 inline shifters. The Ramrods are typically, I got 1 or 2 of them kicking around here that people have just bought me disassembled in boxes, and someday I was going to try to figure out how to put it back together. And now I have a fully functioning one with the Muncie or Borg Warner bracket, T10 bracket. It's complete. Taking off a vehicle and put in storage with the rest of the stuff. And then in the tote back there is a bucket of shifters. There's Mopar shifters, Mustang shifters. I got to pick through that, as you know. It's a passion of mine, old shifter stuff, and man, that stuff adds up in a hurry. It looks like a box of junk. You'd walk right by it at a swap meet. Well, depends on who you are. But the beauty's in the eye of the beholder on that one. So I'm going to close out this video with the last view that we're probably going to get, for now anyway, of my 71 Nova. It's up on the left. I'm doing a few minor things before it leaves, and I have to round up all the parts that go with it, which is plenty. Yeah. But it's going to clean my shop out some. It'll just get replaced with more junk apparently. But anyway, so if you want to watch that, that's coming up next. And maybe some bonus turkey footage. But for me, in my dirty shop shirt that's wrinkled, I'm out. Thanks for watching. Someday soon, the 71 Nova is going to go to live at my friend's house. Before it goes, I wanted to document as much for me and for you how nice it ended up before it left, and I'm sure he will take great care of it. So I'm going to preface everything I'm about to talk about is brand new. Fuel tank. I converted the big block fuel lines, which are 3/8. Small block Novas had 5/16 fuel lines. I converted from monoleaf to multi-leaf. Added Caltrax. Moved the shocks inboard. Narrowed a 9-inch Ford. Drum brake. Parking brakes all hooked up. Works perfect. It has a 360 geared DEI case, Dale Earnhardt Incorporated. Detroit locker. Billet yoke. 1350 drive shaft. The only thing I did not take credit for is the X-pipe exhaust that was already here. I just had to tie in the stainless headers. If you watched all the videos, I went through several sets to find a set that did not hang drastically below the frame so it wouldn't get crushed because the car's going to ride low. And to fit manual clutch linkage and power steering. There's a Lakewood scatter shield, a Richmond Super T10 4-speed, 264 first gear, a long LONG, that's the brand, shifter, with straight rods. Custom clutch fork that I made so I could run rod ends. Steering, control arms, lowering spindles, a ZZ 383 Chevrolet engine with a Lingenfelter cam, Liberty 200cc heads. Sway bar, just a beautiful car. I would love to someday buy something that looked this nice underneath. My 55 is very nice, but remember I said I hate all my work? Well, sometimes I don't hate all of it. So this car came out really nice.